Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, I want to talk about the Aaron Rodgers of the Retread conversation. We talked more about this yesterday, but exploring more of the options that are really out there. How should the Steelers proceed at quarterback? And we will dive in on the dicey conversation that's happening right now with Joey Porter Sr. calling out Ben Roethlisberger and James Harrison for their comments and several other Steelers chiming in. Get it all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, joined by Josh Taylor. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And I want to remind you our episode of Locked On Steelers podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is the #1 sports podcasting network in the world. We're joined by the man himself, Josh Taylor from KDKA TV. You know him, you love him. He's back on the show. Josh, we're going to get into the hot tea that's piping right now in a bit here because there's some spice going out there on social media between former Steelers and it is hot. But I want to talk about something that is present about this team moving forward because that is what this show is primarily about. And I've been talking a lot with other guests about the idea of going with Aaron Rodgers or going with a different retread. And particularly because a lot of people look at Sam Darnold and everyone looks at the most recent successful thing as always. And right now that's the Seahawks. They took Sam Darnold, who was on his, 4th or 5th team in the NFL. And he was a very good part of a system. He wasn't the leading force of the Seahawks. He wasn't the guy that drove the full train, but he was a good quarterback for them, made plays at the right times, and didn't lose them key games. And that's what helped them win. And the question I have for you, Josh, is to the Steelers, because there's a lot of reports saying that Aaron Rodgers is ready and willing to come back to the Steelers. Should the Steelers take that one more year option of Aaron Rodgers, or should they roll the dice, go get another one of these veteran quarterbacks who could be a retread, whether it's Malik Willis, whether it's Daniel Jones, whether it's a guy that's not even on the market right now, like Tua Tagovailoa or Kyler Murray? Should they go that route, or should they stick with Aaron Rodgers and bank on, hey, we're going to draft our guy next year?
If you're going to answer this question honestly, there's an economic term that you need to acknowledge. It's called opportunity cost. Basically, you're acknowledging what you're giving up or what you stand to lose or risk by making a certain decision over another. When we're talking about all these potential available quarterbacks, whether they come in trade or in free agency, each of them comes with opportunity cost. Each of them does. They all have warts. They all have individual issues. They all have shortcomings. Now, granted, guys like Daniel Jones, guys like Malik Willis were in situations where their abilities and their strengths were maximized to a degree where they were helped out. Malik Willis being in that offense in Green Bay, that was the team where he originally started out. So I believe it's where he started out. So you have that opportunity to grow in that system with Matt LaFleur and figure things out and work to his strengths. Daniel Jones, and you and I talked about this going into that game against Indianapolis, played behind one of the best offensive lines in the game.
Yep.
Had a guy who I thought was a resurgent MVP candidate in Jonathan Taylor, probably until they faced the Steelers. But they had a lot of things around them, not to mention a couple really good tight ends and some really good receivers who weren't big names, but they had the elements around him that made him work. Not too different from what we saw with the Seahawks and Sam Darnold, because the Seahawks had the word that you and I talk about a lot, Chris. The Seahawks had the infrastructure. They had the entire infrastructure in place. So it worked with what Sam Darnold needed to do for them. So it all made sense. And plus, another really good offensive line, another really good run game to complement the quarterback. So here's where I'm going with this. When you're talking about the potential of other guys who could be out there and what could happen and the warts that they might have, then you got to look at your own guy and say, well, is our own guy's warts worse than the guys that are out there? Some might argue that his warts aren't worse.
Mm-hmm.
Some might argue that another year of Aaron Rodgers might benefit you more than a year of, say, Tua Tagovailoa or a year of Kyler Murray. What are you going to get out of those two guys that you can't already get out of Aaron Rodgers? And what could you avoid with Aaron Rodgers that you might not avoid with them? So it becomes an opportunity cost question. So now you take it to the next level of, well, who's his head coach? Oh, wait, it's the guy he had a ton of success with earlier in his career, who's an offensive guy and does, from what we've been told, they keep selling us on how great he is developing quarterbacks, right? So who better to take a guy who has warts and opportunity cost, who might get the most out of him, but the guy who he's had the most success under. When you look at all that, the opportunity cost for me points to keeping Aaron Rodgers, because you might get the most out of Aaron Rodgers in the current circumstance that he's in, behind a rebuilt offensive line, mind you. You might get your best results out of him than accepting the warts of other guys that might look worse by comparison.
Yeah, I think that's the thing here is when you're talking about trying to build something right now, there's the risk is something that I think is very much part of this. There's some people that think, hey, it doesn't matter the risk, just take shot after shot at quarterbacks, but that don't always work, because when you do that, it often backfires. And oftentimes you miss out on the chance to build with this. And I think a good comparison, is sometimes like the Cardinals. They picked Josh Rosen really high. It was a bad pick. I didn't like him from the jump. That dude never had anything. The next year, they went and picked Kyler Murray first overall. And granted, there's also some changes with that. And look, Kyler Murray was a better quarterback, but he didn't have the system around him because you didn't build around him. And so he's never had that system. And Kyler Murray he's a good quarterback, but he's never been in that conversation for one of the best. And so what happened? The Cardinals completely missed on the window. And now they're in the system of, we need to figure out how to move on from this guy because we didn't do our jobs in building around him. He's kind of past his prime at this point. We need to ship him somewhere else and figure something else going on.
And he gave him a second contract in the process.
Right.
What? You pointed out all these warts and then you still paid him. Same thing Miami did. You pointed out all these warts and then you paid him. What?
And so this is where I think it could be interesting because you look at that. Now compare that to, say, the Steelers with Ben Roethlisberger back in 2004, back when they needed a quarterback. They could have taken a shot at a quarterback the year before. If they had, who their quarterback would have been? Kyle Bowler. Ooh. Imagine if they had stuck with Kyle. That would have been the pick, that the next quarterback off the list when the Steelers were picking. You know who they got with that pick before Ben Roethlisberger instead of Kyle Bowler? Troy Polamalu. Could you imagine? Ben Roethlisberger wouldn't have Super Bowl rings if it wasn't for Troy Polamalu. We'll get to Ben Roethlisberger in a minute because there's a whole lot of other stuff going on right now. But this is why I think it's important to take calculated shots and not just random shots at the quarterback position and at any position. If it's one thing, I see the argument out there like, hey, you just need to take shots at quarterbacks, but you need to take good shots because if I understand, if you think, hey, there's a chance this guy can be better and we're going to give him a shot, that's one thing. But when you've studied a guy on tape, when you interviewed him, when you're just like, you know what, we don't think that's the guy. Maybe he is, but we're giving that a 10 to 15 to 20% chance that he's the guy. Why not take a foundational player at another position that we have a 80 to 90% chance feeling that he's the guy at that position, a future Cam Heyward type like Derek Harmon? Why not take the shot at that guy and then roll the dice again and wait for our shot at a guy that gives us that 90% chance to take the shot there? And again, when we take that shot at that guy, if we hit, we have successfully built that infrastructure that you're talking about around the guy, which is why I think the Steelers are leading to, hey, if Aaron Rodgers wants to come back, we know he works in the system. He wants to play with Mike McCarthy. We're building this thing out. We can work with this. Again, they could look at other retreads. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but the point here is not to just take random shots and miss out on the opportunity to take the big shot that they really want to take and continue to build their system to the point where when Ben Roethlisberger was brought into the team, he inherited a really good offensive line, a powerful rushing attack, multiple receiving weapons, and a defense that was on its way to being one of the best defenses in the NFL.
I was just going to point that out because a guy who advocates for everything you're saying is Ben Roethlisberger. He said so on his own podcast. He said he came into a team that was pretty much built for everything they needed, and all they had to do was insert him. I think the only guy they really added after him was Heath Miller. Everything else was there. Mm-hmm. Heath Miller was a rookie at the year of Super Bowl 40. So you put all those other pieces in place, and I think Willie Parker came afterwards too. But you have all these other guys in place. You had an All-Pro and Jeff Hardings at center and a Hall of Famer and Al Faneca next to him on your offensive line. He's handing the ball off to a Hall of Famer. He's throwing to a guy who's been considered and become a semifinalist for the Hall of Fame already. All of these things were already in place, and the one guy you needed, the one piece that was missing, locked into place, and all the tumblers started to click. There's nothing wrong with having everything in place first and having that final piece set. And if the guy who was the last beneficiary of said concept is the one telling you that it's possible, it just feels like more evidence to that point for me.
I'm right with you there. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I got to get to the big talking point that is kind of lighten up today from what Joey Porter Sr. was saying on Cam Heyward's podcast this week. It's a little spicy in the conversations of what's been going on. We'll talk about that all next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Josh Taylor, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I'll remind you this show is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress of or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind to knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150. That's all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today, only with TurboTax. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter with Josh Taylor here on this show. Josh, we got to get to the T because this is really interesting about what's been going on here. Now, let's catch people up if you missed it, because it's kind of spread off. Started with the Not Just Football. Really, it started with James Harrison and Ben Roethlisberger's podcast. They had done things to call out Mike Tomlin. Ben Roethlisberger saying, "Oh, he was too lenient," and has made several comments about Mike Tomlin. Saying he didn't do enough here, he didn't do enough there. Kind of calling out Mike Tomlin after the fact. For quite some time. And then James Harrison saying Mike Tomlin's no Hall of Fame coach, saying that he's a problem, saying he should be fired, saying he doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. He didn't do anything for him, blah, 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 all this, that, and the third. Now, earlier in the season, and we talked about this during the season, Joey Porter Sr. went on Not Just Football and kind of said, hey, guys, let's relax. But let's not. There's a veil of secrecy that the Steelers organization has. Let's not pierce it. Those two have not listened to the heed of that warning. They've continued to talk. And then Joey Porter Sr. goes on Cam Heyward's podcast and basically calls both of them out by name, because I don't think he named he named them before. I think he kind of just said former Steelers. But this time he calls them out specifically. He said, James Harrison, he said, when you were under Bill Cowher, he cut you 3 times. He did not care about you. You were a backup. When Mike Tomlin came in, you became a 4-time Pro Bowler. You became an All-Pro, a defensive player of the year. You earned $50+ million. You owe that man everything. You are a Super Bowl champion because of what that guy did for your career. And he talked about Ben Roethlisberger. He said that man is foul of all foul. Called him a bad teammate. He said the things that you're covering up. And I think the bottom line here is that, look, guys, if you want to start throwing rocks, don't live in glass houses, because y'all live in some of the most protected glass houses in the Steelers realm. And I talked about with other people about this, like, oh, well, Peasy has a checkered past too. And I'm like, look, I think that's his point. We all got checkered past, but you know who always protected it before anything else? Mike Tomlin and the Steelers organization. And for you two specifically, who got very checkered past and have been nothing but celebrated by the Steelers, to be coming at the Steelers organization and Mike Tomlin in this way, it's a betrayal of that trust that they protected you with. And it was just very interesting to see those. I wanted to get your thoughts on how that's played out.
I'm in a very unique position when it comes to this topic, because it just so happens over the course of probably a decade, was in that room at different points with some of the people in question, covering those teams and covering those players. I also, before those days, was around the same age as some of the guys in question. So as I was coming of age in adulthood, some of these other men were in the prime of their careers and also coming to the age in adulthood. So you're able to be in position to see things in both contexts. I was able to see things in a professional context, and I was able to see things in a social context. And I'm going to layer this as best as I can. One of the benefits of doing what I do now is I get paid to be very conveniently messy. So let's start this from the beginning. I'm glad that you mentioned other players that he didn't mention certain players by name, but there are other players who fit into this category. But they have done the other thing where they haven't gone into detail. Guys like Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, who also fit into that category of not having the cleanest pass in the world. But the one thing they did not do? They didn't drag Mike Tomlin into this and throw him under the bus. As a matter of fact, Le'Veon Bell went on Twitter and said, Mike Tomlin isn't the problem. And let's keep this day-old draws funky. There were times, especially during the height of that Killer Bees era, there were so many different things that were happening that we never found out about until later. And why? Because one guy did not let it become public, and that guy was Mike Tomlin. So let's keep that 100% funky there. Let's also get into the fact that we're talking about a time period where, yes, this team had a success that hadn't been seen in decades. This is true. But there were also so many different things happening off the field. And if there's one guy whose name popped up as consistently, if not more consistently than anybody else, it was the quarterback's name. For a couple of different reasons. Some we can get into because there's public record of it, and some maybe not so much, but there's layers to that story. So for Joey Porter to be the guy, and let's also talk about James Harrison, because some stuff involves him. Some of the stuff involving him is also public record. So if there's one guy, and I love the fact that it was Joey Porter that said this, because if there's one guy who's really going to be able to tie both together, it's him. Also, who's going to check Joey Porter?
Right.
You going to check him?
Yeah, I ain't checking Peasy.
Who going to say something to Peasy?
Right.
I could tell you Ike Taylor stories that he told me as his radio producer about Joey Porter. Some I could tell on this show, some I could not. But it speaks to the point that when Joey Porter spoke, people listened. When Joey Porter said, that's enough of this, it was enough of it. When Joey Porter said it's time to do this, they did what he needed to do.
I'll never forget the image of Super Bowl 40. Again, I was a kid. I was in high school. But the image of Jerome Bettis running out in Detroit, his own town. He thinks the whole team's running with him. He's running by himself, and Joey Porter's arms are outstretched out, blocking the whole team like, follow me. We're going to let our leader go do that, and now we go. That dude was a leader among leaders. And listen, as a player, historically, I think James Harrison became a better edge rusher than Joey Porter.
Yes.
But Joey Porter created the culture. The who ride, we ride thing that TJ, Alex Heisman, they do to this day is Joey Porter's
Easy.
thing. He started that in like 2001. So
yeah, it was easy.
So I think, again, it kind of goes to his whole points where he's talking about, like, look, like, there's a fraternity here, and you protect the fraternity. And if you don't want to protect it, if you want to start airing out people's business, we can air out y'all's business, and then you won't look so favorably as people as we've made you. But again, that's because we've protected you, because that's how we operate here. And so I think that's kind of what Joey Porter Sr. quietly did during the season when he first came on the podcast. He didn't name no names. He just said former Steelers who like to take on platforms are saying things a bit recklessly. And now he's pointing out, like, all right, I'm going to call y'all out by name because you know what you're doing. And I think it's very interesting. And it's also interesting that Cam Heyward is the one that's giving him that platform to say, hey, Joey, come here and talk some talk, because I'm a current player. I'm here, but you're the guy who's been a player and a coach for the Steelers during these eras. And it's certainly an interesting point of, an early part of the offseason.
Shout out to Cam Heyward for knowing the statute of limitations as far as the locker room. But no, you and I grew up by the same code. When the OG speaks, you listen to the OG, and you don't go against the OG. And you pointed it out in that locker room during that time period. Joey Porter was the OG, and you did not go against the OG. So it's like you get to this part now, and I also say this, and this is where the professional side of me comes in, because besides covering those Steeler teams during that time period, I was also in the Penguins locker rooms during that time period. I was also in the Pirates clubhouse. And if there's a place where things stay completely within those walls, it's a major league clubhouse. Like, if you let something go that isn't supposed to be let out that happens in the clubhouse, they may not talk to you when you come back in as a media member. Like, these are things, what happens in there is sacred. It's a locker room, but that's their social space. That's their barbershop, so to speak. Yep. That's where those guys get together. That's where they play shuffleboard. Or if you're practicing over the South Side, that's where they're playing tape basketball. If you're over at PPG Paints Arena with Sidney Crosby, who will not leave his stall until he makes his tape basketball shot. But that's what it is there. That's what Joey Porter's talking about. You don't break those rules. The Las Vegas clause applies. What happens in there is supposed to stay in there. And that's not been the case here. And I think originally you're right. I think he tried to wrangle it all in and say, hey, let's leave some of this to imagination.
Let's calm it down.
Let's leave it to imagination. And like some things, it can always be a wink and a nudge if you know, and leave it there. Well, here's the problem. The current media landscape, the 24-hour news cycle, social media has really made it hard to keep those walls up now. Bricks keep coming out one at a time. And pretty much the guy trying to keep this wall from falling now is Joey Porter. And now that the bricks are coming out, he's like, all right, well, you might as well take a wrecking ball to it. And if that's if that's the way it's going to be, it's unfortunate. From my position as a guy who was able to see inside that room and saw what happened on the field with those guys and actually had some outside social like interaction from different points. But at the same time, there also, I think, needed to be, from Joey Porter's standpoint, and I think Cam Heyward probably felt the same way, there needed to be some clearing of the air.
Yeah.
As far as, hey, this is what's really going on. And sometimes people will hear things and they're just looking for something to confirm. So they hear the thing that confirms from them and they just assume that it's true because they heard the thing that confirms it. Well, now all of a sudden you got somebody else telling you, hey, wait a minute, let's talk. If you want to get in some chapter and verse, let's get into some other chapters and verse. And that's when it gets tricky. So I can sit here and laugh about how the tea has been spilt, but it does speak to a larger topic that I think gets lost by the wayside now, because let's be honest, this is something that's not happening 10 years ago, much less 20, 30 years ago. This isn't happening with that 05 team. This isn't happening back then. So it does speak to how things have changed. And there are some who are still trying to at least protect what happens in certain spaces. There are some that are at least trying to keep some things, I hate to call it sacred or sanctimonious, but there is still that ethos. There's still that somewhat of that culture to, hey, let's protect what's ours and let's let that be us instead of trying to air out everything and have everybody be all up in everybody's business. Because that's not what you want, especially when we're talking about guys who share the same task of being out on the field together. That's the bond that you can't break. You hear players talk now and they ask you, do you miss, what do you miss most about the game? And most of them say the same thing. I miss being around the guys. They love the championships. They love the parties and stuff and like the parades after you win. They love that. But they miss the guys the most. They miss being in that room the most. They miss the relationships that they create. They miss the friends that they make along the way. They miss that brotherhood, and they always talk about that. You see guys getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. I love that Roger Craig video when Ronnie Lott and Charles Haley showed up. He was just with his guys for like a good 90-second period. It's just me and my guys, man. That is a feeling you can't replicate. And they're coming to tell him, hey, you're joining this special group that we're into. But it's about being with the guys that you have. So when you see something like this fracture, it's fun to talk about because like, oh, yeah, we're spilling the tea. But at the same time, it kind of hurts a little bit because you can tell there's relationships that are starting to wear away. These are guys whose relationships that are starting to fracture. You don't want to see that, especially years after when they've had such an experience and a bond together. You never want to see that separate. So as entertaining as this is, I hope this puts the final lid on it and simmers this down, because the further you get into this, you're going to talk about long-standing beef that you don't want to see over a long period of time.
Let's see. It is 9 months. No. 7 months until the season opener. Yeah, I need them to spark more, but don't put the lid on this. I need about 7 more months of just calling people out. What did you say? Because it's gonna make great.
And fair enough. You need the drama wheel to spin until training camp. Remember, I'm the guy who used to spin the Steelers wheel of drama on his radio show on Sunday mornings. So I know about how the Steelers wheel of drama works. I can get Jamie Baker on the phone if you want. She's in news now too, so she knows how to calculate her messy just as much as I do. But no, it's to that point. It almost feels like it doesn't feel like a normal offseason without some Steelers drama, right?
But to your point, for the sake of the organization, part of what I think has led to the Steelers way and the respect, it is the protection of things. You know, there are certain things that don't get out because you don't want them to get out. I mean, you read back now books about, everyone knows about that Ernie Holmes. One of the big members of the Steel Curtain had a checkered past. People know that he shot at a police helicopter and things like that. But there were other things. There were plenty of other signs. And there's books that have now told the stories many years later. But it's like there's always been that veil the Steelers have had up for themselves, and that these are people who are young athletes who make mistakes, that get into things that if they were fully aired out, maybe things wouldn't be. And this is not just the Steelers. This is everywhere. There's a lot of people that get protected. There's, and there's things that do get out. There's things that happen that involve the law. Look what's happening to James Pierce and the Falcons right now. Look at, and there's other things that kind of get out there about people's relationships and how they do things. But I think the thing the Steelers have historically done pretty well in a lot of respects is they've protected their own. And I think what's happening here is Joey Porter Sr. is like, hey, man, they protect Ben Roethlisberger. You had several major instances that could have blown up in your face, and they could have gotten rid of you before you were ever the Hall of Fame guy that you became. And that this could have been a lot worse, but they didn't. James Harrison, Mike Tomlin bet on you, and even though the previous coach didn't want much to do with you because he cut you 3 times, and for you to call that dude out and to call this team out when they're the ones that protected you, I thought it was interesting when you look under the Instagram of the clip of Joey Porter Sr. saying you seeing several players chime in: Tyler Matakevich, Mason Rudolph, Mike Adams, Mike Mitchell. They're chiming in and they're being like, yep, go get them. And I mean, Mason Rudolph, we know he had a bad relationship with Ben Roethlisberger. We know what that was about. And so there's been a lot of there. And think back to Mason Rudolph, a key example of someone who was protected when Myles Garrett accused him of using a slur against him. And there was a lot of negative energy thrown at Mason Rudolph. And I remember we talked about that on this show when that happened. And I was like, listen, I don't know what happened here or what happened there, but what Mike Tomlin did, he came out, he defended Mason Rudolph, and Mason Rudolph appreciated that. And Mason Rudolph still has an NFL career, and I think that's one of the things that man is a true leader of men. Mike Tomlin protected everybody that way, and for them to betray that protection and throw hot fire at him, I think that's what Joey Porter Sr. is like. Nah, bruh. He's like, if you want to throw hot fire at them, there's a lot more people who could throw hot fire at you for your transgressions. So, to your point, I think that's what this should be a place where it should be like, hey, let's bottle this up, keep it quiet right now, and stay out the news, and make this about Aaron Rodgers or Retread. Let's make it about those things. When you make it about these things, it gets out of hand.
I think we'll know just where this situation is going when we hear one person in particular react to it, because he's going to. And he's also tied to both of these men, and he's going to have something to say. I'm really looking forward to when Ryan Clark weighs in on this.
Oh, gosh.
Because man, when he does, it's going to be one of two things. It's either going to keep the pot stirring, or it might be the thing that kind of pushes the conversation in another direction, maybe towards some kind of resolution. Because the one thing we've learned, and let's be honest, there was a time when Ryan Clark was the stir the pot guy. But I think as he's gotten older and got a little further in his career, I think Ryan has become more of a guy that's like, hey, let's find resolution to this. Let's kind of push this forward in a positive direction. So I'm really curious to see how he weighs in. But you bring up a very good point, and I thought Joey Porter mentioned this too. Mike Tomlin is not going to publicly come out and defend himself in that space. He's not going to come out and try to refute things that are being said by former players, whether it's guys that we like or don't like. And I think that's something that kind of gets taken advantage of in this space, which I don't think is fair. But it's one of those things where, and Joey Porter talked about this too in his first appearance on Not Just Football. He talked about this. He goes, you got guys that aren't playing anymore, and now they're in this other space just trying to generate buzz about what they're doing over here. So you get tempted to do things like that. And I thought that was another opportunity that he was taking to say, hey, don't fall for the bait here for the opportunity to drop something just to get yourselves more recognition. And they end up taking it anyway. So it is unfortunate. But I think you bring up a really good point here. And this is something that Mike Tomlin did. It's something that Bill Cowher did. It's something that Chuck Noll did. And you're right. When you understand how that organization works and how that culture goes, you protect those hypocycloids. You protect that hypocycloid-shaped shield. And everybody who falls behind that is subject to that. So when you see other guys who are commenting and supporting what Joey Porter is saying, and they're not calling him a liar or they're not refuting what he says, then you know that holds weight and that holds merit. And it also shows you that what these men did as coaches of this franchise, it wasn't just about the X's and O's. It was also about the guys that came through those doors and making sure they came through those doors. They may have come in a certain way, but by the time they left, they were at least better off than when they came in. That is something that's carried from this organization for decades now. It's one of the things that sets this organization apart. And I'm not even talking about the success or lack of success on the football field. I'm talking about just that ethos of being able to come in and this becoming a family as much as it is an organization. That's why so many alumni come back. That's why you see Mel Blount coming back and having dinner with these younger players and doing stuff with these guys. That's why you see guys coming back to training camp. That's why you see so much happening. That's why you see so much involvement when it comes to the fans, because that entire ethos was built decades ago. It's the foundation of what this team has become. So when you start to see cracks in that, to see someone step up and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't how we get down, it does kind of give you a little reassurance that, hey, maybe the plot hasn't totally been lost yet.
Certainly. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, time to get to our cornerbacks, final stars and skulls grades on the year. Keep it here with the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about the most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. Hockey games that feel different right from the opening faceoff, speed skating races that are decided by inches, even niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into the competition. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Josh Taylor. We went way over and talking about all the tea that's going on in Steelers. And we're not done talking about that either. That's going to be there's going to be more chapters in that conversation. But we got to keep it rolling. We got to keep it again back to the team at hand. And I want to talk about the cornerback room right now. So over those final stars and skulls grades here. And Josh, let's just get this out of the way now. The absolute worst cornerback of the year, who was just grade down, and got, I think, our first bus ticket upgrade of the year. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with our grading system, it's stars and skulls. We do 1 to 3 stars for good to elite play, 1 to 3 skulls for bad to all-time terrible play, and then, of course, the dreaded bus ticket grade for when you're truly bad. And there's nothing else to be said about that. That's we give those grades every week after a game. I total them up, and then we get to this point, and that's why we start with Darius Slade Jr., who was abysmal. Just 2 stars on the year, 8 skulls, and a bus ticket. That is good enough for an F grade. We've had a few F grades to hand out, but this one might be the F-iest of all of them, and particularly because it was just a big disappointment with how he couldn't play in any of the assignments they gave him this year.
And the bus ticket grade definitely manifested itself because the Steelers eventually got rid of him. And to his credit, I credit Darius Slade for being man enough after the fact and say, hey, look, it wasn't Mike Tomlin's fault. Guys just weren't doing their jobs. And he included himself among that group. So, that takes a lot of self-awareness to realize that, hey, maybe I'm the problem. But it goes right in hand with what we saw on tape. It just seems like there were so many times and so many plays and broken situations where he was supposed to be somewhere and just wasn't there. He was supposed to do something and just didn't do it. So yeah, it definitely justifies what we saw.
Yeah, I think that's certainly that there. But let's move along to other guys. A guy that came in the clutch for the Steelers and wasn't dominant, but gave some support was Asante Samuel Jr. He came back from was a really rough injury to end his tenure before, but he came to the Steelers this year, rode on the injury reserve and was able to work his way onto the team. Got 3 stars, 3 skulls, good enough for a C grade. Josh, Asante Samuel had a big interception against the Dolphins, then kind of just trailed off towards the in the next few games, but did play well, I thought, against the Texans. All in all, I think he showed to be a solid cornerback. If the Steelers don't want to invest a lot of draft capital in cornerback, they should probably bring him back along with James Pierre, who we'll get to. But this could be an option where if Asante Samuel doesn't get a whole lot of play in free agency, maybe he's an easy keeper to see, hey, can we develop something here and keep him as a cheaper vet on our roster?
I'd like to see that. That's really what I want to see, because I thought picking him up, given the circumstances surrounding that, the injury that he had, the nature of that injury, and the fact that the doctor that he saw just happened to be here in Pittsburgh, all those things kind of worked into their favor. But it also turns into a situation where you mentioned it. You mentioned the interception against Miami. We saw flashes of good, and then we saw some flashes of, hey, he looks like he hasn't played for a while. So give him a good, full, healthy offseason. Maybe a full mini camp, maybe a full training camp. And you wonder, with all of those things in moving in the right direction as opposed to being in the wrong circumstances, maybe he does become a good quality veteran depth piece at a discounted rate. I would love to see them explore that moving forward, because I'll say this again. When's the last time we saw this team with corner depth? It's been a while.
It's been a while.
This is an easy way to bolster that before you even get to the draft. So if you can do that, and you can, even if it's just for a year, just to take it out around the block for a spin and see how it goes, that feels like a very low risk, possible high reward situation for me.
Yeah, I feel you there. And you're right. Like, they actually had depth at cornerback. And granted, the depth wasn't, full of stars, but they had answers. How many times did the starters in recent Steelers history not look good at cornerback? I mean, Levi Wallace was a guy that started. He had a good game here or there, but man, there were times he would just be absolutely torched. That didn't happen to this crew. Now, they certainly had guys get beat at times. The next guy up is Brandon Echols, kind of a guy who rotated between outside and slot corner, and he had some good games. He had 14 stars, but he also had 10 skulls, and really those 10 skulls kind of manifested in just a few really, really rough games where he got picked on, mainly the Chargers game when Ladd McConkey got the best of him, and the Texans game when he was just kind of the guy that the Texans kept going after in some big moments. Christian Kirk really got the best of him there as well. But outside of those 2 games, he was pretty much a solidly good player for the Steelers and provided important depth. So he gets a C+ grade, which isn't bad at all. It's just not the thing that's going to be the thing that props up the position and makes them some elite group.
And the thing that makes Brandon Echols so valuable for this particular defense this past season, a lot of the plays he made, third down, red zone.
Yep.
A lot of the plays he made. And these were plays that either stalled out drives or changed games, possession swings. These are plays that you need defensive guys to make now. And I'm going to keep talking about this because for some odd reason, I have to keep mentioning it. Playing defense in this current era is hard.
Yeah.
Because the rules favor the offense. The opportunities to excel definitely outweigh on the side of the offense on that side of the scale. So if you're a defense, you got to try to either limit guys, you might have to try to beat them preemptively, maybe outthink them preemptively, or you're going to have to take the ball away. That's pretty much it. And a lot of plays that Brandon Echols made, limiting plays, maybe outthinking a guy, jumping a play, jumping a route, or taking the ball away. And that's what you want on the global scale. So if you have depth guys doing that, that's always a positive.
Yeah, I think that's the thing there. And then you have depth guys who come up and do shut things down, like James Pierre, who had 11 stars, 2 skulls, a B+ grade here. And I want to point this out. Part of this is, if someone really wants to pick apart the grades and they say, like, wait a minute, this guy had 9 more stars and skulls and got a B+, but this guy had 9 more stars and got like a C+. Listen, James Pierre played very limited games this year. He was held on the bench because they thought that the other guys were going to be superstars. They thought Ramsey and Slay were going to be the answers. But when he eventually came in, he played really well. He got hurt, and then when he came back, he played well again. But bottom line is James Pierre was a major asset to the Steelers. He did his job very well. And to me, This is one of those that's like, when people say, oh, the Steelers, they can't develop cornerbacks. This dude's only ever been a Steeler. He's been a guy that's been brought up, and been given opportunities before. There were times he sparked up and did well, times he fell off. But this year, he really showed all the development that they've been putting into him over the years, and he became a very good cornerback.
Shout out to Tony Serino.
That's our boy. He loved
James Pierre. The James Pierre fan club. Shout out to Tony. What up, though? But yeah, it feels like it's been a long time. Remember that failed fake punt situation where he dropped the fake punt pass?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like it's been a long time since then.
Yeah.
And I say that in a good way because he had opportunities before and he didn't always capitalize. But this past season, James Pierre got opportunities and made the most of them. So I was really, really glad to see some of the plays he made. And I mean, he did it where he left on an island, one-on-one, covering receivers and doing the job, making plays, forcing turnovers. James Pierre just jumping in here time and time again. And this is another one of situations. If you can get a guy like this and you're not paying a lot of money to do it and you know what the results are going to be, it feels like a no-brainer to me to keep a guy like James Pierre around for an extended period.
I agree. The only thing is he's 30 years old, so it's like the question is the age, but at least for another year, it would make sense. Unless someone wants to go out there and pay him a big dollar, then hey, if they do, that's a good comp pick that's going to come in 2027.
More power to him.
But let's get to the top guy who was definitely the best cornerback on this team. Granted, he had the same grade that I finished out with James Pierre, but that was Joey Porter Jr. Excuse me. We just got done talking about his dad. But Joey Porter Jr., 17 stars, 6 skulls, good enough for a B+ grade. This dude really rebounded. He was having a not so great start to middle of the season. He didn't do really well against the Jets. He was kind of solid, for a few games. Had a really good game against the Browns the first time, but then was picked on a bit in the first Bengals game, and then was just not good against the Packers. And it was like, man, is Joey Porter Jr. is this not gonna be his year? But Josh, of the next after that week, he had a good game against the Colts. I graded with a neutral game against the Chargers, and then from that stretch, from week 11 to the wild card games, the next 9 games, he received a star in 8 of those 9 games. In 6 of those 9 games, he received 2 stars, including the final 5 games of the season from the Dolphins, the Lions, the Browns, the Ravens, and the Texans game. Each of those were 2-star grades. If Joey Porter Jr. has found himself and he is the guy, he could be the guy that's the shutdown corner the Steelers have been looking for so long, and that could mean a lot to the future of this team.
I felt like the second half of this season, and we kept talking about when this moment was going to come. When's the light going to come on? The light is on. It's no longer blinking. It is not off. That light is very much on, and I don't see it going off anytime soon. And I love the fact that Joey Porter Jr., he didn't make some huge change to his game for that light to come on. It just became the consistency in doing what he's already done. That became the thing. And this is something that I think gets left behind and it kind of gets ignored when we're talking about what athletes do. The best athletes, regardless of what sport you're talking about, the best athletes are the ones that do the right things consistently, regardless of circumstance, regardless of situation, regardless of setting, doesn't matter where you are, where you're playing, what time of day, what you're dealing with, what you're going through, how hurt you are, how consistently, what can you do, what you do at an elite level over and over again. He's starting to do those things more consistently. You see those, instead of it just being flashes, it's now continuous. It's now an expectation. It's now a habit. Excellence, therefore, as Aristotle said, not an act, but a habit. And these are becoming habits for him. I think that recognition of him as being one of the better corners in the league is now going to come based off the second half of that season. I think the confidence that they're going to have in him as that number one lockdown guy on this defense is going to come based on that second half of the season. And I think he's justifying that number more and more every single day based on that second half of the season.
I agree there. Josh, I'm way over time here, so I gotta call this to an end before Ross Jackson comes and kills me. But Josh, let me know, let people know you can find you, follow you, get more of your work.
Josh Taylor HD on social media. Probably see it below. As far as the professional side, every night, 7:30, 10 o'clock, Monday through Friday, KDKA TV at 7:30, KDKA Plus at 10. the space will look a lot different. I kind of took over my kids' play area for this particular show. Thankfully, they're at daycare. But yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm at the news desk doing my thing.
Absolutely. He's Josh Taylor. Josh, thanks for joining us. Thank you all for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, wherever you get social media. At Carter Critiques is always my handle. Read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com, including my grades on the defense fully are listed there. You can check that out. And also, you can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Break it down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here tomorrow with another episode right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.